Welcome to Tech Talks, everyone. We are excited to have you here with us today to learn more about the principles of survey design. It will be presented by Jane Lowe, who is part of our data management team here at the EDC. And we're excited to continue our discussion about surveys and the importance of the design behind them. Our monthly challenge was to think about maybe any recent online surveys you've created and think about that during our presentation. You can also think of ways to improve your online survey design as we go through the different principles. And if you have any questions, I'll be monitoring the chat today. If you are joining us for the first time, please feel free to put your state and say hello in the chat, and we're excited to get to know you better. And with that, we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Jane.
Thanks, Jane. I'm gonna see if I share the right screen this time.
That looks good.
And you're still seeing the slides, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Jane.
Mm-hmm.
Well, welcome everyone joining us today. I'm your host, Jane Lowe from the EDC, and we will be covering the 11 principles for designing online surveys. Before we dive in, I would like to invite you, that goes along with our monthly challenge, to think about any online assessment that you have taken in the past, not just something you designed, but maybe something you already did in the past. It could be, like the NPRP, PPRP that we are a little bit more familiar with, or any other, it doesn't have to be work related, any other online assessments or surveys that you have come across. As we go through today's section, consider how some of these principles we'll cover might apply to those experiences and what made them helpful or not helpful from a user's perspective. So let's start with the basics. The first few principles focus on how the survey starts. These small design choices can make a big difference in whether someone even continues with the survey, which is our end goal, right? We would want our user to actually go through the entire survey and complete it so we have the data. So the first principle is make sure to start with a friendly welcome page that tells people that they're in the right place and how to begin. Just like imagine like a receptionist greets you before a meeting, it sets the tone. For example, in our NPRP open assessment welcome page, we started with welcoming the hospital personnel or whoever the participant is, and followed by, we are glad that you are joining us in this nationwide quality improvement initiative to set a welcoming and friendly tone for our participants. The next one is to make sure the first question is easy to see, read, and answered by all respondents. A good first impression really helps people to feel confident continuing, which again is our end goal for them to complete your online survey or assessment. For example, in most of our assessment, we start with asking about the demographic information of the participant or whoever the person who is filling out the assessment. We ask, usually the typical questions are we ask name, the title, phone number, or email address, or their contact information. Those questions are short and easy to complete for participants to feel confident in continuing. Now that we've talked about how questions are presented or how assessment or survey are started, let's pause and think about how the entire survey is laid out. I want to challenge the audience today and see if you feel comfortable to share if there has been a time that you feel annoyed or negatively by too much scrolling or too many clicks in like any survey or assessment. I would like to go first. I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with the burger chain place restaurant Five Guys. So I used to go there a lot. And then there is like a customer satisfaction survey that they do after they ask you to do after you order your food and everything. They're like, oh, if you complete this, then you might enter like a lottery of some sort, so you can get like free burgers. So I'm like, yeah, of course I want free burgers. Everyone wants free burgers. So I actually scanned the QR code and tried to do the survey. And then, spoiler alert, I did not complete it even after 3 days of trying to complete it because I really wanted that free burger. The reason to it, why now that I think back, is they asked so many questions and there were so many clicks. It felt endless. It felt like there's no end to it. They asked me very specific, like, what kind of sauce combination do you like? And I'm like, I don't even remember what kind of burger I had 3 days ago. So there's also that. And they also ask a lot of questions specifically, which location you go to, why do you go to this location? I feel like at some point they're asking for my social security number too. Like it feels like that because it is so long and then there's no skip. And then it just too feels like there's forever. Um, is there any other person who would like to share an experience where they felt annoyed or by too much scrolling or too many clicks on the survey?
Jane, this is Greg. I'll agree with you. I don't like surveys that are really long, but I also don't like them when I think it's going to be one length or take a certain amount of time, and then it turns out I'm wrong. They misled me. It's going to take a whole lot longer. And at that point where I feel like I've been misled is the moment that
Right.
I will stop filling out that survey. And also the ones where I think it's going to be just a click here, click there, a number scale 1 through 5 or something like that. And then there's a whole bunch of pop-up windows that ask me to type in responses too. I didn't feel like that was the time I wanted to type a lot of information, but I
Right.
didn't mind just clicking on numbers.
Right.
And
Right.
then I don't want to type that in. I'm trying to maybe interact with people at a table, or that wasn't the right time. So kind of generally, anytime I feel like the survey misled me or misrepresented itself, that's when I
You
don't
bailed
complete it.
out. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, now that I think about it, no, thanks for sharing, Greg. This is amazing because all the things you talk about, we will be covering in today's section. Now that I think about the Five Guys survey, they did ask me to rate like a matrix question and then talking about like how satisfied you feel about service, how satisfied you being about like the cleanliness. And it was a lot of going back and forth thinking about, oh, how do I feel about the cleaning? I have to think back. And that was like a this was overwhelming. That's a lot. It's not worth it at this point for a free burger. So I did bail out. So thanks for sharing, Greg. If anyone else have other experience they would like to share, feel free to put it in the chat and Jane will be reviewing them. So let's move on to the third principle. Let's look at how different layouts affect the experience. So questions in your online survey, if you want it to be successful, should be displayed in a conventional format similar to paper surveys. Some of these conventions could be like the question number, how you put it, whether your texts are less left justified versus centered, if there's any white space and proximity, what kind of format are you using for your survey? So we will go through a couple of different display to help you visualize a little bit more with how different designs or display really affect the response rate. So the first one you see on the left-hand side is called a scrolling design. Think of it as like reading a full article. Essentially, it means all or most of the questions appear on one long page, single page, and then all of the questions that user have to scroll through, whether it's on your phone or on your computer, from top to bottom. So some pros and cons, obviously. The pros is it is pretty easy to see the full survey, so you know what is expected, how many questions are there. It is pretty good design for a short survey because if it is short, people know it is short and they're more likely to complete it. The cons for it is people might skip or miss questions if they scroll too quickly, or if it is a long survey and they know, like what Greg was saying, if they feel like it's gonna taking forever, they may or may not complete your survey. The second design is what we call a paging design. Think of it as like a step-by-step quiz. This survey specifically is just split into multiple pages. Instead of everything in one page, there's just multiple pages. usually with one or a few questions per page. Some examples would be like flipping through like a digital quiz, like one question, you answer one question and you click next, and then you go to the next screen, and then there's another question, so forth and so forth. So some pros and cons. The pros is it is a cleaner design layout. It is less cluttered because there's only one or a few questions per page. The cons, though, it could feel, if it is a long survey again, or even if it is a short survey, it could feel slower because there's a lot of action, like Greg was saying. You have to keep clicking things or you have to keep typing things. People might drop out midway, right? Because they feel like, oh, it's a lot if they think this is too long because they don't know how long they're going to be in this design. The third one is a hybrid design. It is kind of like a mixture of both paging and scrolling. Think of it as more like a completing a topic at a time. It groups related question on one page, and then you click next, and then you go to a next session or page, and then with another group of questions. Some examples would be like NPRP or PPRP. The first page, we usually ask for like demographic on one page, right? We ask for the participants' demographic information, their name, their title, the email, phone number, and then they click next, and then they will go to like hospital or the agency demographic information on the next page. The pros and cons. Pros, it is a little bit more engaging compared to just scrolling or the paging design. It kind of balances out visibility and focus because then people can see, oh, this is a section specifically that I'm doing, and if this is logically the same topic, it's easier for the participant to focus on that specific part of your survey. It also keeps people moving without feeling overload. Like, instead of scrolling 50 question in one page, they know it is different sections. It feels more structured. Some cons to it, though, it does require thoughtful design because you need to group those questions logically and make sure everything flows good and all of those things. So these are the three very common survey designs that we have. Really, the goal is not me telling you hybrid is the best. The goal is really to choose the style that makes it easiest and most comfortable for your participants to finish the survey. So whichever audience, know your audience, whatever you think is the best, choose that design. While we're talking about survey length for survey display design, we also want to talk about how to measure a length of a long survey. When evaluating the length of a long survey or just a survey, focus on how much time it takes to complete, not the number of questions or pages. A well-designed survey that reduces cognitive burden, like I was saying about the matrix question, and uses smart skips or branching logic can actually feel short and efficient for the respondent. This next set of principles help us shape how the survey feels once you're in it, especially when asking open-ended questions. Principle 4 is to limit line length for short, open-ended answers. This is pretty self-explanatory with just the title. I would like to provide a couple examples. For example, if you are asking, the question is, what is your zip code? And then your answer design, instead of like a whole box, it's just empty box and people feel like they can put whatever they want. You should limit it to, since you're asking for zip code, limit it to numbers only. And then you could limit it to like 5 to 10 digit or number. So then people won't like write their full address or they put like their phone number because they see you need like numbers. So that is why you want to limit the line length or even the type of the data that people can enter for short open-ended answers. Now we move into guidance and instructions. It's not just what you ask, it is how and when you explain it that matters. Principle 5 is the action instructions right after the questions. So for example, if this is your question, right? Your question is, please rate your satisfaction with our service. And then the instruction immediately below that question should be use the star using 1 being very dissatisfied and 5 being satisfied, your specific instruction should always go right after the question so that people know what that instruction is for. Because then, especially if you're asking people to rate things, they don't know which one is the highest and which one is the lowest. So that your instruction should follow immediately after your question. And the other example that I have is if your question is asking people to upload proof of training or certificate completion, the instruction right after that should be click choose file to upload whatever file that applicable, instead of like putting like just a line of text, because then some people might think, oh, you want me to type all the information about my certificate. But no, we actually want them to upload a file. So you want that instruction to go specifically under your question. Principle 6 is a little bit similar to Principle 5, is to place instructions where they're needed. As you can see from the graphic on the left, it is, the instructional manual, and then you can see it has like little graphics showing you how specifically to fold an origami. Some examples of it, how it differs from Principle 5 is that instead of listing instruction at the very top of the survey, put them right next to the question, like what we were saying for Principle 5. One example I have is, let's say, imagine a survey that you have like 5 different questions. And at the last question of your survey, you ask the participants to list the top 3 reasons you chose our service, or something similar with that. Then the instruction for that last question should be limit your selection to 3 options. Instead of having that instruction at the very top, right? Because there's 5 questions of the survey, you'll want it to be right after the question that asks for the 3 options. Okay, we are at Principle 7. So the following principles deal more with flexibility and the flow of an online survey or assessment, how we can make surveys feel smarter and more responsive. Principle 7 is one of my favorite, is essentially tell you don't require respondents to provide answer to question to proceed. In a simpler term, it's just don't force answers unless, necessary if they're actually required. So a couple examples that I have is, imagine this is your question. Have you ever been diagnosed with like a health condition? So obviously this question is a little bit more personal. And then if that is one of the questions you would like to ask your participant, we would encourage you not to make it required an answer to proceed, because again, it could be personal and people might feel uncomfortable and bail out, and we don't want that. You could make it not required, optional, or let the respondent skip if they don't feel comfortable answering it. The other example that I have is if it is like a demographic survey, and the question is to ask participant to describe their household income, they can also add a skip button or an option like I would rather not answer, so that they don't just drop out midway. Yes, Andrea.
Thanks, Jane. I just wanted to add here is, yes, this is an important principle. But the reason why we require people to answer questions in the NPRP and the PPRP is otherwise you cannot generate a gap report because you have to have answers to those questions. So that's why those assessments don't follow this principle, is because we have to have it for federal reporting and for the respondents to get gap reports.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you for the comments. The next principle, again, we're still talking about the flow and flexibility, is use skip and branches logic when available. So some of the questions that example that I have is if it is like a demographic survey and we're asking them if they're currently employed. If the participant said, no, I'm not currently employed, then you would want to design the survey so that your participant can skip all the job-related questions and move on to the next section, so that it saves them time and then it makes more sense to the participant. Principle 9 is to keep all the responses option on one screen. So essentially, don't have response option extend across pages or screen because it could be confusing. Especially if there's like a list, like select all the apply or something like that. Um, that would be confusing because you are not sure if you have half of the options in one page and the other half of the option in the other page, whether it is like too long or you think that is a better design. It could be confusing to the participants because they're not sure what the second half of the options are for. Is it like a new question or anything like that? And they could just, drop out and just not finish it. So make sure to have all of your options to the same question on one screen. Principle 10. You would, let's see, let the respondent know where they are in the survey. This might get a little tricky and we'll go a little deeper in the next slide. Is essentially you can see it from the graphic on the left, there is a progress bar. You kind of know where you're at on the survey or assessment. You don't need to use like a progress bar. You can use like symbols or like color, images, or any conversational language. It really to help the participant to know where they're at. Like what Greg was saying, he's like, oh, at a point I don't know where I'm at. Like what my experience was is I feel like the survey is gonna take forever. Um, Specifically for short surveys, you instead of using like a progress bar or like images, like I was saying, you could also use language to say this is page 1 of 5, or a clear progress bar like you see on the graphic on the left. It keeps the motivation high, kind of, transparency, so participants know where they're at. This might surprise you, but progress in long surveys, progress bar actually increase the dropout rate. They don't always help. It doesn't mean that, it's the end of the world. We definitely have alternatives for it. But essentially is if it is a long survey, imagine if I'm doing like a survey with like, I don't know, 50 questions. And then every time I click one or two more questions or however the survey is designed, I see the progress only move a little bit. So that might increase the dropout rate. Yes, Andrea?
Right, trying to get the unmute to.
You're good.
Just wanted to add here because for those of you who were familiar with the PPRP assessment with agencies, is we wanted, because it was perceived as a longer survey. We talked to our survey method specialist, and she said the progress bar will actually increase dropout, but we still wanted it in there. So what we did is we were able to engineer a way that it only became apparent once people were about 50% done with the assessment, so they could see, okay, I am getting done, but that they weren't overwhelmed at the beginning by seeing this long progress bar. So there are ways that you can work around it, and that's how we did.
Thanks for the clarification, Andrea. That's very helpful. I was going to say the other. Oh, yes. Go ahead, Greg.
Along those lines, Jane, I'm curious, could you insert a progress bar in a hybrid design where you group questions together? And if you have 15 questions in that one group,
Right.
could you do a progress bar that way and do a new progress bar for each group, but not do an overall progress bar? And would that change the outcome of bailout, do you think?
I think that's a pretty good design. What do you think, Andrea?
You would have to make it obvious to the participants that that progress bar is only for that section. Otherwise, like you had said, Greg, is when you felt like you were being misled, it really frustrated you. And that's the main thing, is you want to be
Right.
transparent. So you could do that. The thing is I am not aware of any survey software that does that. In fact, our survey software didn't allow it for, you either had it on or you didn't. So we actually had to illustrate a progress bar that was at the top of the page once you got to that 50% mark. So it was a way that we were able to meet the steering committee's needs and wants, and then also follow the survey methods. So yeah, there's ways around it and things you can do, but you always want to be transparent about what you're doing. And like, for example, with the progress bar is for this section, you're halfway through or whatever. But you would probably have to illustrate it like we had to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great
Yeah.
question.
That is a great idea. Yeah.
Great question. Jane, you've got about 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks, Jane. Yeah, the other alternative that I was going to say is what Andrea also mentioned is you divide your survey or assessment into like sections, saying like, oh, this is section 1, and then you have completed section 1, and then you go to section 2. So they kind of know where they're at. They don't necessarily need to know how many more sections there are going to be. I mean, again, it depends on your audience, but it does give audience a sense of structure without discouraging participants. The last principle, this one you can probably guess from the graphic on the left. Finally, let's look at one common type of question that often causes issue, even though we see it everywhere, is the checkout that apply. Respondent are asked, usually with these questions, checkout that apply, respondent are asked to select items from a list, which is often quite long. The issue is that many people tend to satisfy a behavior where participants choose just a few answer or whatever pop up first that seem to be good enough, rather than carefully reading through the entire list. Research shows that respondents often skip over the later choice, like I mentioned earlier, and the order of the options can lead to biased result. Like I said, if they appeared first, they're more likely to get picked. So that is why checkout that apply might create some issues. I mean, if you still feel like checkout that apply is the way you want to go, that's okay. There's alternatives. There's way that we can help you. So for example, when we're talking about like the big matrix question is, these are the items, if you have like 10 or 20 items that you want people to rate on a scale, 5-point scale, that's a lot of thinking, right? Because they have to go through first on the left to see that item that you want them to think about, and then go to the right side and then to actually think about, oh, how do I feel about this specific item? And then repeat it for like 20 times. So that just saying it out loud feels overwhelming to me. So an alternative that you can do is you can break those large matrix questions into smaller groups. It could just be like maybe 2 or 3 questions at a time, or even just single questions instead of like a whole table that all clump together. Maybe just 10 separate questions, individual question. That might seem a little less overwhelming. Or instead of using a 5-point scale, it's just use like a yes or no or something like that. And that would really help to reduce the cognitive burden. So these are all the 11 principles for designing online survey. I want to end this presentation as you think about designing or reviewing any future assessment or survey in the EMSC space, keep these principles in mind. Small tweaks can lead to a much better data or even a better experience for respondents. I would also like to emphasize that you don't need to be a designer to apply all these ideas. It's just about using research to make thoughtful choices. And that's all I have for you guys. Do we have any questions for the last 2 minutes? I think we're good. I'm going to move the time back to Jane.
Thanks so much, Jane. That was great information, awesome reminders, especially since a lot of what we do is based in data and the survey world. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your EDCTA liaison or Jane to follow up. Just want to let everybody know that we will not be hosting Tech Talks in July. The EMSC Data Center offices and the University of Utah campus are closed for a Utah State holiday on July 24th. So we will plan on seeing you in August and look forward to that. If you have any ideas for Tech Talks, we want to make sure that the trainings we provide are meaningful for the work that you do in EMSC, and want to encourage you to feel free to reach out to me anytime. We do trainings on everything from marketing and communications to analyzing data, EMSC specific information for projects, things that are up and coming, how to report data through PowerPoints and presentations and more. So we appreciate you joining us today and look forward to seeing you in August. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Greg. Good to see you.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Sable.